Hello and welcome back to this video. In our previous video, we were able to write and call our very first function. So in this video, we are going to be looking at parameters and arguments, their meaning and their differences, and then their various types. So without further ado, let us jump in and start demonstrating how to use parameters and arguments in our function. So for this video, I'm going to simply create a function that is going to add two figures. So I'm going to define it by writing the def keyword, and okay, so I'm going to call it sum figures. So now I'm going to open and close my parentheses, and then I'm going to, so what do I want to do? So I'm going to simply say sum up 12 and 10 for me. So I'm just going to write 12 plus 10. So I'm going to create a variable and call it sum or summation, and I'll set it to 12 plus 10. So, and then I'll print summation. Now I'm going to clear this terminal and I'm going to comment this out. Now I'm going to run this, and like we know, nothing is going to happen. Then I'm also going to call the the sum figure function, and then open and close it. So, and I will run. So Python has summed up 12 and 10, and it has given us the result. Now, if for instance you have multiple figures that you want to sum up, how do you now pass it in here dynamically? Or for every time that you want to write summation, you are going to come in here to change the figures. It doesn't work like that, right? So what we can do is that we can create variables outside of this function, and then we pass it into the function, and then the function will perform the summation for us. Now, how do we do that? First of all, when you are creating your function and you want to be passing arguments inside the function when you call them, what you do is that you are going to specify that you are expecting the user of this function to pass in some items inside the function when they call them. So at this point of function definition, that you are stating that I need the users of this function to pass in certain parameters inside this function, then you are going to specify those parameters that you are expecting. So at this point, these items that you are specifying are called parameters. So I am just going to pass in x here and comma and write comma, and I'll pass in y. There is no standard for naming what you are passing, but you are assigning those items that you are passing in here variables. So now I'm going to change the figures that are here to x and y. So x plus y. So what we are telling Python is that Python, whenever this function is called, you're going to be given two figures. And when these two figures are given, please sum it and then print it for us. So that is a typical way of writing function. So this time around, the values can be changing. So at this point, we have already called our function here. And what do we want to do? We are now going to pass in numbers. So I'm going to pass in the same 12, and then I'm going to pass in 10, right? So it was the same thing that happened before. So this time around, I'm going to save again, and then I'll run this. So now, again, we have 22 on the screen, right? So now you can see that whenever you're calling this function, you can change the values from here. You can decide to add 50 and 9. So automatically Python knows that whatever values that you pass into this function will be summed, right? So we're going to again run it, and now we have 59. So I'm going to clear this terminal and move on to the next one. So at this point that we are calling this function and we are passing in these two values are called arguments. So now, the first time we defined the function, we just called it, and because the only thing the Python needed to do already had a side effect, right? So by side effect, we mean something was already printing on the screen, right? So we just got the hello to the word print, and nothing else happened. So it did not require you to pass in anything. So at this point, so I'm going to uncomment this function again. This function did not require you to pass in any parameters. Okay, so, and I'm going to demonstrate something. I'm going to comment this out, and for this, I'm going to pass in maybe a string. So I'm going to pass in hello, right? So, and I'm going to run this. So we can see now that Python is giving us an error, and it's saying that this function name takes 0 positional arguments, but 1 was given. So the item that you're passing into the function when you're calling it is called an argument. But when you are defining that function and you are stating that you need this, so as you can see, I just hovered on this and Python called it a parameter. So, but when we pass in the argument, Python says, no, 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 I don't need any argument. You are not supposed to pass any argument when you're calling this function. So I hope you understand this perfectly well and that this does not confuse you. So the next thing that we are going to be looking at is the types of arguments or parameters that we have in Python. So now we have stated that we have positional arguments or parameters, keyword arguments, and default argument. So for this video, I am going to start with the default. So right now, I'm going to remove what I have here and I'm going to set this x to the value of 50 and then I'm going to set y to the value of 10. Now, do you know what has happened? I have given x and y the default value of 50 and 10, which means if there was nothing passed in here, Python will work with what we have here. So I'm going to save this and I'm going to comment this one out again and I'm going to run this code. So now we have 60. Of course, 50 plus 10 is 50. Now, again, I'm going to come here and I'm going to pass in 20 and 10. Then I'm going to save this and run. So now Python has ignored the default argument that we have at the place of function definition, and it has worked with what we passed in the argument. So when you have a default value, when you are declaring your function, they are called default arguments or default parameters. So you can refer to them as default parameters. Now, but when you now pass it in at the point of calling the function, you have arguments. Okay, so now let's look at keyword positional and keyword argument. So because we are looking at positional and keyword arguments, I'm going to clear this, and for this I'm going to clear everything that we have in this function. So what I'm going to do now is that I'm just going to print x and print y. So I'm going to print them on different line. I'm going to print x. So Python is complaining that we did not define x, so because I cleared them, so I'm going to put my x and y back, and on the second line I'm going to print y. So I'm going to clear this and run this code again. So x is now 20 and y is 10. So the first print statement is x, so the first item here is 20 and the first item here is 20 and the second print statement is 10. So I'm going to switch these two print statements. So the first one is going to be y and the second one is going to be x. So here we now have the values swapped. So I think with this alone, we should understand what positional arguments mean. Well, positional arguments simply means that Python by default use their positions to assign these x and y variables or assign their values to the parameters that you set. I hope you are not confused. So now these x and y are the parameters that you set. And here you just wrote 20, 10. So Python by default, because you did not say y equals or x is equals 20 or y is equals 10, Python by default use their positions and assign them to the parameters that you set at the place of definition of function, and it is using their position. So it's assuming that the first figure you passed in when we are calling the function because the first parameter that you declared, and then the second figure that you pass in becomes the second parameter that was defined. But if by chance you say y is equals 20 and then you say x is equals 10, so what Python will do is that it will now assign this 20 value to y and then it will now assign the value 10 to x, right? So again, I'm going to save this and I'll print. So now we have 20 and 10, right? So we can see what is happening here. So it is not rocket science, it is just basic. So even if you're working with strings, the same thing is applied. So assuming I want to write a function, let me define another function. And what I want to do is I want to use this function to format my string. So I'm going to call it formatting function. So I'm going to call it just formatting. So I'm going to tell Python that I need one item here and it is going to be a list of strings. So anything you call it, just You can call it X, you can call it string, you can call it anything. Okay, you don't have to be so explicit. Python understands that you're saying I need one item. So if I say that I need X and T, we have said Python I need two items. Okay, so you don't have to worry about what you use in this parenthesis. So I'm going to call it S, and what do I want to do with this X? So anything that you pass in becomes the S, and I'm going to just print, I'm going to pass in a list of strings. So I'm going to say S, and I'm going to access the first variable or the first item in that S, and I'm going to call dot upper method on it. So that is very simple. So now here I'm going to call the formatting method, and I want to create a list of string here. So list of string. So the first one is name, and the second item there is age. And then here I'm going to pass in my list of string, and I'm going to save and run this. So we can see that this name, that is the very first item here, the string method here, has now formatted the very first item here. So if I want the second one, which is the index 1, to be formatted, well, we have the age formatted. So I hope this makes sense. So if I want it to be keyword argument, I can say that I want two items. So, and the second one is T. And let's say we are expecting a complex number that we want to access the imaginary number. So I'm going to create another variable here, or I can even pass it in here directly. Okay, so here I can now say that T is equal to a complex number 2 plus 5j, then I'll write comma, and S is equal to list of string, right? So, and in here, what I want Python to do for me is that I want Python to give me the value of t dot image, right? So I am going to save this now and run. So we can see that Python has given us those two that we wanted, right? So we passed in the value of t, and then we passed in the value of s. So I hope this is very, very easy to understand, and that is not too complicated to understand. So thank you so much for watching this video. See you in the next video.